explain the battles of Trenton and Princeton and why they're important. These two battles have a lot of reasons for them. One being the Hessians, and you'll know all about them after I'm done. The Battle of Trenton was a sneak attack on the Hessians. The Hessians are German soldiers that were hired by the British. Back to the battle, the Hessians were not expecting the attack. It was Christmas, after all. Despite the bitter weather and the harsh fights, there were not many casualties. Only 2 Americans died. 5 were injured. The number of Hessians that died was around 5. This was in the Battle of Trenton. A couple days later, on January 3rd, the Americans arrived in Princeton. No one expected to fight this battle, but they ended up having to. This battle was fierce and had many more deaths than in Trenton. The Battle of Princeton was a victory that motivated the Continental Army even more. The Battle of Trenton was also won by the Americans. The Americans were on a losing streak before the battles of Trenton and Princeton. These victories motivated George Washington to ask the colonists to stay in the army a bit longer. These victories were because around 2/3 of the Hessians were captured. All 4 of the German commanders were killed. In the end, the battles of Trenton and Princeton inspired the Americans to fight. They gave them hope when they needed it most. The Americans were desperate for hope. It gave them a confidence boost, enough to stay.
Benedict Arnold was a traitor, and he was a traitor because he betrayed from the American colonist side to the British side. He offered the British seizure of the military fortress at West Point, New York, where he was commander, in exchange for £10,000 and a British military commission. He did this because he wanted a higher title than general. Arnold was a heroic man and did many heroic things, but there were many lies. People were always saying that they did the heroic thing, not Arnold. He got so mad that he switched sides so he could get a higher title and escape the lies. He was important to this time period because he was the commander at the West Point fort on the American side. This was an important role that barely anyone had. Arnold traded when the Stamp Act and Tea Act were in session. This was a very hard time to trade, so he acted like the acts didn't exist. He was also very bossy when he was commander. He was always interrupting people and yelling at them to do the right thing. No one forgave Arnold for betraying, but he didn't care because he had £10,000 and a British military commission. When he was 10, he was sent to a private school in Canterbury. He was expected to go to Yale but couldn't afford it, so he went to the private school. Arnold's mother died in 1759. His father drank too much and was worse after the death of his wife, and then his father died in 1761. Arnold was heartbroken but knew he had to take care of his younger sister, Hannah. No, Benedict Arnold is a heroic man. Even though he was bossy, he was still very brave and heroic. Arnold was born on January 14, 1741, and died in London on June 14, 1801, when he was 60. Thank you.
Today I'm going to tell you about the amazing life of John Hancock. John Hancock was born on January 12, 1737 to John and Mary Hancock. His parents died at a young age, so he grew up with his uncle, a rich, influential British merchant. He lived in Brittany. Hancock went to school in Harvard, a very well-known and well-respected school. When the conflicts between the colonies and Great Britain began, Hancock was instantly a patriot. As a merchant, the taxes affected him a lot and lowered sales. Hancock became a hero in Boston for smuggling goods past British officers. He was even once arrested and put to trial with the judge as Sam Adams. As a fellow patriot, Adams deemed Hancock innocent. He had no further runs with the law. After the Tea and Stamp Act, Hancock spoke out against the unfair treatment for Parliament. He even participated in the Boston Tea Party, tarring and feathering tax collectors, and other less peaceful protests. Hancock's next key event was during the battles of Lexington and Concord, where Hancock was attempted to be captured by General Thomas Gage on his secret mission to go through Lexington and Concord, capture John Hancock and Sam Adams, and get the military supplies in Concord. But Paul Revere warned him just in time. Hancock was elected president of the Second Continental Congress and oversaw the debate that led to the drafting of the Declaration of Independence. Hancock was even the first one to sign the Declaration of Independence, and his signature was so big it became famous. I hope you learned why Hancock was so important to the American Revolution, why he was a prominent patriot and an overall American hero. Thank you.
Hi, I'm going to tell you all about the Declaration of Independence and why it's so important even today. Without this document, we would not be our own country, we would not be free, have rights, and we would still be ruled by Great Britain. The Declaration of Independence was signed on July 4, 1776, drafted and written by Thomas Jefferson. The document stated many things about people's rights and things that are going to happen once they are their own country, finally free, and very independent. The document explained what the British government did wrong and things that are going to happen once they are their own country and finally free, and how they're going to let people vote and have a say in things. Jefferson listed more than 27 complaints and problems with Great Britain's colonists had. Also, in America, everyone there was going to be citizens of America, which was a good thing. People were also going to get to vote and have a say in things, and their opinion was finally going to get to matter. They were also going to get to choose their own government. The Declaration of Independence broke up into 3 sections. The first one being about basic human rights. The second one, complaints for King George that the colonies had. And the third one is the formal statements on independence. Also, Thomas Paine made a pamphlet called Common Sense. Common Sense explained why the colonies should break away from Great Britain. Common Sense got really popular, more people started to buy it, and that meant that more people wanted to break away from Great Britain. This was another big reason. To sum it up, the Declaration of Independence changed many lives, and we would not be here today without it. The Declaration of Independence will always be a big part of history, and never be forgotten. The Declaration of Independence makes us independent and free. Thank you for listening.
Hello, my name is Evan, and today I will be teaching you about Benjamin Franklin and how he was possibly the most important person to the freedom of the United States. Our journey begins in 1706 when Benjamin Franklin was born into a very big family. In that family, Benjamin Franklin was the second youngest kid. Now the colonies hate the British, so they needed a Continental Congress. Benjamin Franklin and others were a big part in coming up with the Continental Congress. When the Continental Congress happened, Benjamin Franklin was the representative from Pennsylvania. Now the war has started, and Benjamin Franklin and the colonies are having a tough time getting wins in battles. So they sent Benjamin Franklin to France to try and make an alliance with the French, and they would work with the colonies in the Revolutionary War. Benjamin Franklin went to many dinners in France and parties. All these dinners and parties were secretly gaining trust in the colonies, so the British would work with them in the Revolutionary War. Now it's 1784, and the colonies have completely beat down the British in battles such as battles of Saratoga and battles of Yorktown. So they needed a Treaty of Paris, and the Treaty of Paris was signed in 1783. In conclusion, now you know how Benjamin Franklin was indefinitely the most important person to the freedom of the United States. Thank you. I'm going to be telling you about the battles of Saratoga. The battles of Saratoga was a turning point of the American Revolution. It was fought in the late 1777. It was a series of battles. The battles that were fought were the Battle of Freeman Farm and the Battle of Bemis Heights. First, there was the Battle of Freeman Farm. A man named John Freeman owned the farm. In the Battle of Freeman Farm, Burgoyne and his army tried to steal fruits and veggies. However, he and his army did not succeed. This is how the battles of Saratoga started. Then there was the Battle of Bemis Heights, started on October 7, 1777. This battle proved to people that the battles of Saratoga was a turning point of the American Revolution. After this battle, Burgoyne gets trapped in Saratoga. Hull's army remained in Philadelphia. St. Leger's army was defeated at Fort Stanwix. On October 7, 1777, Burgoyne made a desperate attempt to attack the Patriot force. After this, he thought that America should have won the war. Also, after the battles Bemis Heights, or the Second Battle of Saratoga, Burgoyne finally surrenders. Lastly, British General John Burgoyne loses and thinks that the Americans should have won the war. The Americans won the war because the British surrendered and gave the American troops the victory. Also, potential foreigners such as France thought the Americans should have won the war. This is why the battles of Saratoga was so important. First, because the Battle of Saratoga was a turning point in the American Revolution. Second, because the Battle of Freeman Farm started it. Third, the Battle of Bemis Heights ended it. Thank you.
Many years ago, we weren't allowed to do what men do, but Deborah Sampson did. Deborah Sampson was born on December 17, 1760 in Clinton, Massachusetts. She lived in a poor family of 7, her family rode on the Mayflower Pilgrim. Deborah Sampson is a very well-known person in American life. Deborah's father, Jonathan Sampson, was a struggler as a farmer, so he started saving. Some people say he got lost at sea and died, others say he abandoned his family. Deborah's mother couldn't take care of all her children, so she sent the oldest to live in different homes. Deborah lived with her cousins Floyd, but she died 3 years later, so she moved in with an old widow and statue. When Deborah was 10, she became an indentured servant. At age 18, Dutch was favored. She became a teacher in the summer and a weaver in the winter. Deborah didn't want to be a soldier and fight, so she did. She disguised herself as a man, and her fake name was Robert Schrader. On May 23, 1718, she was assigned to Captain George Webb's company of light infantry, 4th Massachusetts Regiment. In 1782, Deborah fought the war. She got wounded twice. One was when she was in a skirmish and got gashed before her from a sword. Two was when she got shot in the thigh, but she finished with a doctor. Elsie figured out her identity, so she got the bullet herself with a compass. In 1703, Deborah became terribly ill. She even became unconscious. This time, Deborah had to go to a doctor. While a doctor was examining Deborah, he figured out that Robert Schiller was actually Deborah Sampson, a woman. Deborah plays a really important role in the American Revolution because besides all the fighting during the American Revolution, she shows that women can do the jobs and work men could do. Deborah Sampson later died on April 29, 1827. Thank you.
I'm going to tell you about the Treaty of Paris. The Treaty of Paris was a very important paper. The treaty was negotiated with the city of Paris, France. That's where the name comes from. As part of the treaty, East Florida gave land to Great Britain. The main reason for the treaty was 1, to recognize that the 13 colonies need to be independent and free, and 2, for the U.S. boundaries to go westward expansion. The other reasons had to do with rights. These rights included fishing, debts, prisoners of war, access to the Mississippi River, and property of the wilderness. Only Article 1 of the treaty states America's existence as a free, supreme, and independent state. The treaty set boundaries between the British Empire in North America and the United States of America.
There were three different treaties: the one that ended the French and Indian War, the one that ended the French and Allied, and the one that ended the American Revolution. The key episodes came in September 1782, when French Foreign Minister Vergennes proposed a solution strongly opposed by his ally, the United States of America. King George III ratified the treaty April 9, 1784, which was a little after the deadline, but nobody complained. The ratified versions were exchanged in Paris, May 12, 1784. I hope you learned why the treaty was important, how it changed rights, laws, people, and especially lives. The Treaty of Paris is why we are free now. Thank you.
John Hancock was important to the American Revolution, not just because of his loyalty to the colonists, but he persuaded them against British rule. He was the first American to sign the Declaration of Independence, and he signed big fancy laws because he wasn't scared King George saying it. He protested the sheriff and the Stamp Acts. He led protests against the British during the Boston Tea Party. He was charged with treason. The first shots of the American Revolution were fired when the British marched to Lexington to capture him. Paul Revere warned him that after him, and he was able to escape. He was also part of the Sons of Liberty with Samuel Adams that played a big role in the American Revolution. He is also recognized as an important because he defended the merchants and the patriots. He would rile up the colonists to fight against the British. He said to him, "Let every man do as in his own eyes." He was very rich but generous. John Hancock had owned a shipping company and helped the Continental Army with money and supplies. He commissioned George Washington as Commander-in-Chief of the Army. In 1775, he was the president of the Second Continental Congress and a representative of the Massachusetts legislature. He wasn't as concerned about dying because he just wanted to gain independence and lead the Americans to freedom. He was one of the biggest supporters of independence and a big hero of the American Revolution. He died in 1793. Counties in 10 different states were named after him, and also the tallest building in Boston was also named after him. I hope you enjoyed my presentation.
Today I'm going to tell you about the Battle of Yorktown. The Battle of Yorktown was the last and final battle in the American Revolution. The battle was fought in two different battles. The first battle of Chesapeake Bay and the second battle of Yorktown. It was fought by General George Washington and French Admiral Comte de Grasse and Rochambeau against Cornwallis. It was fought in September 29th, 1781 to October 19th, 1781. Clinton's supply ship ambushed de Grasse's fleet, but was destroyed, a major turning point. A spy named James Armistead helped Lafayette against Cornwallis by gathering information and spying on the British. Clinton was surprised when his supply ship didn't reach Cornwallis, and he was shocked that George wasn't attacking New York, but Yorktown. The Battle of Chesapeake Bay was the turning point, and the Battle of Yorktown ended it. The Battle of Yorktown is important because of the last battle in the American Revolution. There is a memorial at Yorktown. Many things around the United States is named after the Battle of Yorktown. It is also the battle where
Jefferson was a very important person in the making of American history. He wrote one of the most important documents in history. Thomas Jefferson wrote the Declaration of Independence in the Second Continental Congress. The document made America, well, America. It gave America freedom over the British. However, there were changes made by other members of the Congress. It was originally handmade to Thomas Jefferson, who made the first draft of the Declaration of Independence. In 1777, he was elected governor of Virginia. 10 years later, he was elected first Secretary of State. 4 years later, he was elected vice president, and in 1801, Thomas Jefferson was elected the third United States president. So he was vice president, Secretary of State, and governor of Virginia in his lifetime. And you can't forget the Declaration of Independence, or you could say he won his lifetime for this country and this world. In 1803, he purchased Louisiana Territory, aka the Louisiana Purchase. The reasons include future protection of America against others, expansion of America, and the exploration of unknown lands. Thomas Jefferson was an American statesman, diplomat, royal architect, and philosopher. As the third U.S. president, Jefferson stabilized the U.S. economy and defeated pirates from North Africa during the Barbary War. Sadly, in 1826, Thomas Jefferson died at age 83 in Monticello. Thomas Jefferson did a lot in his lifetime for this country and world, and we should be thankful for Thomas Jefferson. Thank you for listening.
Hello. So today I'll be teaching you about the Treaty of Paris of 1783, why it was one of the most important parts of the American Revolution, and it also ended the American Revolution. So the Treaty of Paris was signed in the Hotel de York in the city of Paris. That is why it is named after the city of Paris. After the Battle of Yorktown of 1781, where the British raised the white flag, it took 1 year and a half for the treaty to get signed, but no one can sign. The Americans also had very important points that counted to the Treaty of Paris, even though there were only two. The first and most very important point is they wanted the British to recognize the 13 colonies to be 13 free, independent states, not owned or even ruled by the British Army and government. The second very important point is they wanted the U.S. borders to extend western to the Pacific Ocean. In conclusion, I hope you've learned something about the Treaty of Paris, why it's one of the most important points of the American Revolution and how it ended the American Revolution. Thank you.
I'm going to tell you how Benjamin Franklin helped win the American Revolution. One way he helped win the American Revolution was by allying with France. He allied with France so he would get more soldiers, money, and ammunition. He looked at parties in France that King Louis XVI would gain trust in him. In 1778, France allied with the colonists. He was also the only founding father to sign all 4 key documents. In 1783, he negotiated the Treaty of Paris with Great Britain, which officially ended the war, and the colonists won. He also helped draft the Declaration of Independence. He was born in 1706. And his wife was Deborah Reed. Franklin are that he used to be a political statesman and he was a master painter and writer. He was also the youngest kid in his family. He also published a book. His parents were Abia Folger and Josiah Franklin. His wife was Deborah Reed. He started to go to school when he was 8 years old. He also had kids. His kids' names were William, Francis, and Sarah. He lived in London until 1775. I hope you learned a lot about Benjamin Franklin. I hope you have now realized how important he was to the American Revolution and how he helped win it. He was truly one of the most important people in the American Revolution. Thank you.
Benedict Arnold was a very well-known trader in the American Revolution. He was a general for the American side. Also, he could have helped the British win the American Revolution, which would make today so much different than it is today. Benedict Arnold was born on January 14, 1741 in Norwich, Connecticut. His father, Benedict Arnold III, a rich shop owner, and his mother, Hannah, the mother of Benedict's sister, Hannah. Benedict Arnold wanted to be a patriot, and he also wanted to help the Patriot side. So he rounded up volunteers and joined the Patriots. He was engaged in the war and helped make the plan to block the Hudson River. The Battle of Saratoga was a battle when Benedict Arnold went out of the fort to fight, and he killed a lot of British soldiers. But a different general didn't want them to go out of the fort to fight. But the plan worked, so he told Congress he was the one to make the plan and didn't even mention Arnold's name. When the fighting stopped, it was because everyone was so tired. So when everyone was rested and ready to fight again, there was the Battle of Saratoga Part 2. This was when Benedict Arnold went out of the fort to fight again, and he got shot in the leg. Benedict Arnold was a very important general because he knew everything. So when he started telling the British things, it really helped the British. He is now known as a traitor for betraying the American side. He was dishonest because the American side really trusted him, and then he just changed sides. But today might not be the way it is today without the things he did, even though what he did was so bad. Thank you.
The Treaty of Paris and made in Paris, that's what it's the name from. It was the American representative John Adams, and Benjamin Franklin who signed the Treaty of Paris. The Treaty of Paris is very important to the American Revolution. The Treaty of Paris is an official treaty of peace in America and Britain. A Treaty of Paris signed in Hotel New York. John Adams, John D, and Benjamin Franklin. They are all from America. And one British representative, David Hartley. That was the some people who signed the Treaty of Paris. And David Hartley was staying at Hotel New York after the British surrendered the Battle of Yorktown. It took on 1 year and a half, but the king finally agrees. John Adams, John Jay, and Benjamin Franklin did a very good job negotiating the treaty. He had two very good points signed off by Catholic independence. Treaty of Paris was signed in 1783, but was official in 1784. Benjamin Franklin went to many parties, but not just for fun. He went to the parties to gain trust of famous people in France. John Adams got order from George Washington to go to Paris and help Benjamin Franklin. And John Adams was pretty mad about how Benjamin Franklin was in Paris. He was going from party to party. But Benjamin Franklin knew what he was doing. And John Adams and Benjamin Franklin had a share of bed again. Then John Jay came to help them out. When Ben gained a lot of people trust, they were ready for the big day. Benjamin Franklin got a lot of famous people who signed the Treaty of Paris. And they all completed their mission. They have won independence. Thank you for listening.
Thomas
Jefferson is important to the American Revolution because he wrote the Declaration of Independence. The Declaration of Independence explained how America is its own country and how we have freedom today. Thomas was born in 1743. When he wrote the Declaration of Independence, it was in 1776. The colonists were really annoyed until they got freedom from the colonies. King George III was ruling the colonies. The Declaration of Independence is so important that it was in the history of the United States. They won the American Revolution. One reason why they won the American Revolution is because of the Declaration of Independence. When he wrote the Declaration of Independence, it was in the same year as it was signed, and that year was 1776. Thomas was a patriot. Thomas was a statesman and a lawyer. He was the third president of the United States and stabilized the U.S. economy. He defeated pirates in North Africa during the Barbary War. The Louisiana Purchase is a big piece of land owned by the French. It is a piece of land in between the Mississippi River and the Rocky Mountains. Thomas completed the first step. The first step was first to write the Declaration of Independence. Then he shared it out for it to get signed. Thomas Jefferson died in 1826. Thank you.
The Declaration of Independence was written by Thomas Jefferson. It was signed on July 4th, 1776, the Day of Independence. They decided to make the Declaration of Independence at the Second Continental Congress. The Declaration of Independence has three parts. The first part is about basic human rights. The second part is about complaints that the colonists had for King George. The third part is about a formal statement on independence. 56 people signed the Declaration of Independence. The first person to sign it was John Hancock. His signature is the largest and really stands out on the document. The Declaration of Independence took 17 days to write. The Declaration of Independence includes what the British government did wrong to the colonies, and that includes raising taxes and not respecting the families that lived in the colonies. Common Sense, written by Thomas Paine, showed colonists that they should fight for their freedom and become patriots. It's also a reason that they wrote the Declaration of Independence. The Declaration of Independence helped families live a normal life and have their freedom from Great Britain. Without the Declaration of Independence, maybe we would still not have our freedom and still be ruled by King George. Thank you.
The Treaty of Peace was a document that ended the American Revolution. It was an official peace treaty between the United States and Great Britain. The Treaty of Peace was discussed in the city of Paris, France. That is where the name comes from. There are three really important men in France: John Adams, Benjamin Franklin, and John Jay. They all signed their names on the Treaty of Peace. The Patriots and British were fighting, then the British only surrendered at the Battle of Yorktown. It took a very long time for an agreement between the United States and Great Britain for the Treaty of Paris. It took 1.5 years for King George to approve the treaty. After the treaty was signed, it was sent to the Continental Congress. The United States had 6 months to approve the document and return it to England. The document almost did not arrive on time. On January 4, 1784, the Global Convention was scheduled at Maryland State House.
was getting out of control. 13 colonies won the war and were colonized the United States. Great Britain realized that they should be free and independent. There were 3 treaties. One was the treaty that ended the war, and the other one was the treaty that ended the French and Indian War. The last one is the Allied Treaty. The colonists had no more taxes. After the war, George Washington took over. He was the first president. Between 3 other treaties, the Treaty of Paris was the most important one because it ended a long war. Without the Treaty of Paris, the American Revolution would not have ended, and we would not be free. Thank you.
I'm going to teach you about William Howe and why he fought the American Revolutionary War, and how he became famous for his fights, and how he captured the Americans' capital, Philadelphia. William Howe was a British leader in the American Revolutionary War from 1776 to 1777. He is famous for his captures of New York, New Jersey, and the colonist capital, Philadelphia. He got the rank commander-in-chief because of his captures, but was fired because he didn't really participate in the plan of General Burgoyne. Instead, he captured Philadelphia, but was still replaced by Henry Clinton. Howe was sworn developing those plans, and the degree to which he was responsible for British failure, despite his personal success, were both subjects of contemporary and historic debates. He resigned his post as Commander-in-Chief, British Land Forces in 1777, and next year he returned back to England, where he was at times active of the defenses of British Isles. He sat in the House of Commons from 1758 to 1780, and he inherited the Viscounty Cowley upon the death of his brother Richard in 1799. He married but had no children, and the Viscounty became extinct. William Howe was a strong man in the American Revolutionary War, but he wasn't a good listener because
the Treaty of Paris was an agreement between America and Britain that ended the Revolutionary War. Even after the British Army surrendered at the Battle of Yorktown, King George III ratified the treaty 1.5 years later. The Congress and Federation ratified the Treaty of Paris on January 14, 1784. King George III ratified the treaty on April 9, 1784. This was 5 weeks after the deadline, but no one complained. The first point of the Treaty of Paris was slip, now that the 13 colonies were independent. The second point was that the boundaries of the U.S. were allowed for Western expansion. Other points had to do with fishing rights, debts, property lists, and prisoners of war. Both sides wanted to protect their citizens' rights and citizens' possessions. Did you know that Benjamin Washington painted a portrait of the treaty negotiations? The left side for the Americans was completed, but the right side was never completed because the British refused to pose. Also, there were other treaties involving nations involved in the war, such as France, the Dutch Republic, and Spain. Spain received Florida as part of its treaty. Now that you know what the Treaty of Paris is, what do you think would happen if the Treaty of Paris had different points? Or if the Treaty of Paris was made into a nation? Or what if the Treaty of Paris never even existed? Thank you.
both sides during the war. How did he do this? He was supposed to be on the colonist side, but during the war he betrayed them. Watch this Ignite to learn how he helped the colonists and how he betrayed the colonists. Benedict Arnold was born on January 14, 1741, and he died on June 14, 1801. He was a bookseller and he became successful and earned a lot of money. He joined the Sons of Liberty during the state battle. When the Revolutionary War started, he was elected leader of the Connecticut Militia. He joined the Continental Army during the Battle of Quebec. During the Battle of Saratoga, he was shot in the leg, but he also became somewhat of an American hero. He was often called bossy, and he was accused of using his power for money. Some generals like Horatio Gates did not like Benedict Arnold at all. In 1779, Arnold started to tell secrets to the British. He agreed to let the British have a fort at West Point because they offered him £2,000 and a British military commission. Benedict Arnold wanted to speak to Major Andre face-to-face to discuss final details. After they discussed final details, Benedict Arnold went home. After Major Andre was captured, Benedict Arnold sailed to Great Britain. He was never seen in America again. Benedict Arnold was very good. He not only helped the colonists, but he helped the British as well. He was a good soldier. Thank you for watching my Ignite. I hope you learned something new about Benedict Arnold or even the American Revolution. The Declaration of Independence. Can you guess who wrote it? Well, Thomas Jefferson wrote it, and today I am going to teach you why Thomas Jefferson wrote the Declaration of Independence and why it is important. Thomas Jefferson was born on April 13, 1743. Thomas Jefferson wrote that document called the Declaration of Independence. He wrote it because the Second Continental Congress wanted independence from Great Britain. It was published on July 4, 1776. The colonists were no longer under British rule. They were very happy. It took Jefferson 17 days to write it. John Hancock was the first person to sign it. There were 5 patriots chosen to write the first draft. Those 5 patriots are Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Franklin, John Adams, Robert Livingston, and Roger Sherman. The Declaration is in 3 parts. The first one is about basic human rights. The second one is about complaints on King George III. The third one is a formal statement of independence. In the Declaration, there is a famous line. That famous line goes like, "We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal." It took Jefferson a long time to write it, but it was worth it to the colonists. Because of the Declaration, the colonists were no longer under British rule. They didn't have to pay taxes on anything. They didn't have to do what the British said. They finally had their independence they deserved. Thank you. Today, I'm going to teach you about the Treaty of Paris. There are 3 treaties in the American Revolution: the one that ended the French and Indian War, the France-Nally Treaty, and the Treaty of Paris. The Treaty of Paris is the most important treaty because it officially ended the American Revolution. It was made in Paris. That's where the name comes from. The Treaty of Paris was signed on September 3, 1783, when the 13 colonies won the American Revolution. Great Britain told Paris to make a treaty because the war was getting out of control. Benjamin Franklin, along with John Adams and John Jay, signed the treaty and put their fingerprints on it. A year later, the American Congress approved the treaty. The 13 colonies were finally America. The Treaty of Paris was a victory for them. They were finally recognized as an independent nation, America. When the treaty was approved, they put boundaries between the British Empire Great Britain gave America East Florida. The Americans were finally happy. They had freedom. The Americans had no more taxes, no more fighting, no more being mad, and no more being told what to do. George Washington now took over. He was going to be the first president of America. If the Treaty of Paris was not written, signed, and approved, maybe it would still be under British control. This is why the Treaty of Paris was so important in the American Revolution. Thank you for listening. I'm going to tell you why Benedict Arnold was important. He was important because he was one of the biggest traitors to the Continental Army, even though he helped the army so much before he betrayed them. Before he became a traitor, he started as a colonel and led the Americans to attack on Quebec City. He and the Americans lost the battle, and he was shot in the leg, but he was promoted to brigadier general even though they lost the battle. But he was not satisfied, so he to lead the army. Washington stopped him and he shot Arnold on his face. For the fact he was considered heroes in the Battle of Syracuse, he bravely led the Americans to victory. In 1759, he ran down a large secret to the British. Hume was the commander of the fort at West Point. He began breaching the defenses of the fort so the British refused to capture the fort. But Major Andre was discovered and hanged, and his papers in his boot revealed Arnold's plan, but Arnold was able to escape to the British before they could capture him. After the British captured the fort, he led many battles against them. He was promoted to brigadier general. He led many battles against the American University lost, like the Battle of Richmond, which he won, and the Battle of London, which he was destruction. Benedict Arnold died in 1801. In conclusion, Benedict Arnold was very important to the American Revolutionary War, and the Continental Army might have lost the war without Arnold. Thank you.